That's awesome. Amen. Well, any of you Olympic fans? Maybe some of you, maybe a little bit. My first Olympics was 1968. I was 8 at the time. They were in Mexico. Of course, there's only 3 networks back then, so that was all that an 8-year-old could watch. In 1972, I was 12, and those games were super significant for me. I was swimming at the time, and Mark Spitz had just won 7 gold medals, so I was like, wow, this is like amazing. I think I had like a life-size poster of Mark Spitz on the back of my door with his 7 medals. And then when I turned 16, the games were in Montreal in 1976, and a guy named Bruce Jenner, I think he's changed his name now, but anyways, and so we regress. Anyways, he was super inspiring for me. He was American and an athlete, and for me, I wasn't really raised in a home where kind of we grew up going to church and all that. Not that we didn't ever go to church, but it just wasn't like a traditional Christian home. And so in the summer of 1977, when I was studying overseas in Germany, I was enamored with going to the Munich Olympic site where, the Israeli athletes were killed and where things happened, and I was there, got in a car accident, and it was there that I actually came to Christ. And as you know, I still have neck problems to this day, like God reminds me of that trip all the time. But I just share that to say they were like a big part of my life prior to coming to Christ. It was like, that was like the ideal. As a young guy, I'm just like, those are the heroes. I didn't think of politicians as heroes, and I still don't, but there can be some. But these athletes were really enamored. Of course, then Christ came into my life and started to change things. But one of the things that was super encouraging for me is, as I started to understand the Bible, there were these sports analogies, and that was like what life was all about. They weren't like really religious statements and really weird statements. They're like, no, these are normal illustrations that just a young guy could relate to. So it's always super cool to me. So today we're going to get to look at some of these athletic passages, some of these metaphors that are in Scripture. And for me, again, it was super cool because the last thing I wanted to be was religious. I just loved God. But here was a God that says, well, we can talk about sports in a way that you can be inspired. And I was like, that's legit. Like, I really want to learn more about that. So today, as Tokyo finalizes its games, the torch will be extinguished tonight if you're watching on TV. We've had 19 days of competition with 11,000 athletes competing for 339 medal events across 41 different sports, and we've learned a lot of stuff. I don't know if you've had a chance to, but there's some interesting stories. Some of the best ones have been reported for us on CBN because there's a lot of athletes that are giving God glory. You're not going to see the protests on NBC and the kneeling, the wokeness, but there's a lot of believers who've really given God tremendous glory during this time. It's been super encouraging to see that. In the ancient games, they were a lot different than the games today. They were more life and death events. Today, when you think of sports, you think of equity, you think of men and women, you think of kind of, it's like a game. It's an avocation, it's a hobby, it's a sport. In the ancient world, remember, the best athletes were the best armies, and the best armies were the ones that won, and the ones that won were the ones that lived, and the ones that lost were the ones that died. So the javelin in the ancient games was not just to go, let's see if we can throw this stick. It's like, no, let's see if we can kill people with good accuracy, because if we can do that better, then we're going to beat the Persians, and the Greeks will survive. And they won't ransack and pillage our wives and our children. So the Olympic Games were more warrior games. They weren't just athletes. These were soldier training events. They often ran with shields. Pole vaulting was how to get over a castle wall. I mean, these weren't just like, let's just see how high you can jump on a stick. It was like, no, these were skills needed to actually win battles so your civilization would actually survive. So being good athletes was very important in the ancient world. And so if you went to the Olympics and the ancient games, they were more like going to a UFC fight. It was more like going to maybe a military base. Like if you've ever been to Annapolis or West Point, there's kind of a code about it. Because you were dealing with just all men primarily. Not a lot of women attended the Olympic Games in the ancient world because it was kind of a festival of physicality. It was just kind of a testosterone fest, if you will, because it was just a kind of a pumping event of girthiness, you know, because, again, they weren't just games. They were super, super important to them. They were contests for combat, really. Today, of course, it's a little different. But as the games are closing in Tokyo, I thought, well, it's fun. Let's go back to the ancient world and deal with this a little bit. And today, you and I need to conquer a lot of things. It may not be another country, though there are some geopolitical events going on. But we certainly want to dominate the flesh, the world system. We want to be good fighters in dealing with the devil. These are not battles we want to lose. So we want to be really good contenders when it comes to the Christian life. New Testament writers like Luke, Paul, the writer of Hebrews, use Olympic imagery and athletic metaphors to talk about the Christian life. So we're going to look at those today in the book of Acts. 1 Corinthians, Philippians, 1 Timothy, Hebrews all use Olympic metaphors to describe the Christian life. And the games were to the Greeks kind of what the temple was to the Jews, or what the triumph was to the Romans. It was like the big deal. And therefore the biblical writers assume you can visualize these Olympic Games in a way that you and I could visualize the JFK Kennedy assassination. Like, can you picture the car? Can you picture like the head going forward, going like you can picture the Space Challenger, you know, shuttle, you know, exploding. It's like, I got it. It's in my head. It's just Pearl Harbor. It's like totally can visualize that. You know, they're going into the harbor and there's battleships and the U.S. Arizona. It's like, got it. Like, you just can't grow up here and not like have those images in your head. The ancient world, they could picture Olympia in their head. We were talking about going to Disneyland, right? You guys are going to Disney World. Can you, well, let's just use Disneyland here in California. Can you picture how that's laid out? Like, can you picture when you go in, you know, is it Frontierland when you walk in? No, right? It's Mickey Mouse and the flowers and the train, and then you go down Main Street, right? And what's at the end of Main Street? The castle. And to the right is what? Tomorrowland. Like, you know it. Like, it's like, see it, the Pirates of the Caribbean. Got it. I mean, it's like, I know exactly where that is. That's over to the left, and you're going to have to, you know. So I just say that to say, when the Olympic venues are mentioned in Scripture, these writers assumed you could do that, just like you could with Disneyland. You could picture the gymnasium. You could picture the stripping room. You could picture the Temple of Zeus, where they took the oaths. You could picture all these venues and go, wow, this is, I've been there, and they're going to make metaphors to the Christian life. So today, what I thought I would do is give you kind of that mental map. I'm going to give you 8 venues. And I'll give you 8 scriptures that match those 8 venues. It's like making a metaphor of Main Street, the castle, Tomorrowland, Frontierland. Like basically, the biblical writers just assume they could use those illustrations because you could picture it. So we'll start with the first of the venues, and this is super... Okay, this is so fun for me. Like, I could do like a 10-week series on this, but we're going to try to jam it all in one shot. And by the way, I did take my wife to Olympia, so we actually have been there. Was that the funnest day of our marriage? Or?
For something.
It was so fun. It was like being with the best tour guide. He would tell me everything about everything.
It was hot. It was humid. We got off our bus. You know, it's kind of a dust heap out there. My wife's just looking at it like, really? We had just been to Florence and different places, you know, in Europe. And it's like, really? I'm like, You can't picture it? This is like the Praetorium right here. Like these little stones that are left, like this is what's left of like the temple of Zeus. This is like, this is where they came and the guy wasn't like that. She's like, just being a good wife, you know, basically. But I do think it was the best day of our marriage. For someone. Anyways. So let me take you to the first venue. This is called the gym, the Gymnasso, the gymnasium. Paul, when he writes Timothy in 1 Timothy 7:4-8, says this: train yourselves, Greek word gymnasso, train yourself, discipline, drill yourself, educate and exercise yourself, if you will, strain and stretch yourself, to be godly. Train yourself to be godly. By the way, when you came into it, you go through this big arch and stuff, it's super cool. But right when you get in there, to the right is the gymnasio. Like the training fields and stuff are right there. It's the first thing you see. And here Paul says, well, you've seen that. You've been to the games. Paul probably sold tents at the games. He was a tent maker. That kind of was how he paid for a lot of his ministry. And of course the Olympic Games didn't have hotels around it, so they would stay in tents. Paul was there. I'm convinced he was there. Of course, I'm convinced. Some theologians disagree with me, but what do they know? Train yourselves to be godly, for physical training is of some value. It's some modest benefit. Working out, exercising, sleeping, you know, and training well and stuff. But more importantly, he says godliness, which is like personal integrity and consecrated devotion to God, has value for all things. It holds promise both for the present life and the future life to come. So Paul tells Timothy, you've been to the gymnasium. You see how hard everyone works out and sweats and trains. They submit to these 10 Hellenodocai, these 10 amazing Greek coaches, and they have certain strict diets. And you know, Olympians do that today. They have a strict regiment to get to where they are. They train hard, they're prepared, and they practice, and they discipline, and they drill, and they exercise, and exert, and push, and pull, and pump, and they have all these regimented routines and systematic stress that they put on themselves. They do it physically, which is awesome. That's of some value. But we're supposed to do that for godliness. Like, we should be training that hard to know the things of God, to be honoring to God, to be like a really good follower of Christ. Somaticae gymnasio, somatic, bodily exercise is, or a great constitution, if you will, is great, but great character is better, Paul says. It's going to help you not only in this present life, but godliness will certainly help you in the life to come. Like, you're going to want that. So your physical discipline is temporary and transient compared to your spiritual growth, which is timeless and transcendent. So he says it's much more powerful, it's more permanent, it's more extensive, it's more eternal. You see great athletes train physically, it's very inspiring. Train yourself to be godly. Work hard to be godly. Give yourself to that. Make it a discipline to be godly. Second venue, the temple. Now, if you're in Olympia, it's the temple of Zeus. There's a big statue. So if he actually stood up in the temple, it hit his head, because he's the full length of the building. And if you're running on the track, by the way, you could see the top of the temple. That was something you could see in many of the venues in Olympia. So the temple is very important. Paul writes Timothy in his second letter, and he refers to this temple because this is where they took their sacred oaths. And today, of course, Olympians still take an oath that they're going to compete according to the rules. And we've seen this. I mean, we had this great gal, I can't remember her name. She won, do you remember her name, sweetie? She ran, we were just talking about her. She ran the, I think, 100-meter dash and won it for the U.S., but then she tested positive for marijuana, so she got excluded from the Olympic team, and she wasn't able to go to Tokyo. So, yeah, Richardson. Yeah, so, you know, it's sad, you know, and she's, by the way, fessed up to it, and she owned it, and she's been pretty mature about it, which is cool, but she realized, you know, if you don't compete according to the rules, you actually are bumped out, even if you win. And Paul knows that because they did that at the Temple of Zeus, where all the athletes and the judges had to take an Olympic oath. And he says this in 2 Timothy 2:5. If anyone competes or contends as an athleo, as an athlete, if anyone wrestles as a warrior, or if anyone takes part in these contends in these competitive games, he does not win or receive the prize or the victor's crown unless he competes according to the rules. So Paul tells Timothy, look, there's a lot of people doing their own thing, but they're going to get disqualified in the end. So you can win the race, but you're not going to get the prize unless you compete according to this. Every sport has rules. I know that as an NC2A referee, there's lots of rules. I'm like, I'm sorry to make this stuff up. I'm just here to enforce it. Talk to the NC2A. I didn't make this up either. No, you're not supposed to be sleeping around. No, you're not supposed to be doing A, B, and C. No, you're not. Well, why do you care? It's not about me. It's he's told that this is what we're trying to. And you can't just do your own game and cut your own corners and believe I'm not in. No, you're disqualified. We have to be people of the Word. Paul is telling people, you have to do it according to God's way. You can't just worship any way you want. We have to worship in spirit and in truth. You can't just call your own shots. There's a rule book, and if you cut corners or you cheat or you play illegally, it doesn't matter if you're a grappler, a wrestler, a boxer, or a runner, you will be disqualified. And Paul tells this in his last letter to Timothy. Make sure Christians play by the rules. I don't know, it's just super popular today to make up your own Christianity, your own spiritual wokeness. It's like, you're not going to get any points. Social justice isn't going to get any points, people. We could give the whole world shoes and soup, and that is not going to win the day. So, here, again, Paul is assuming you would picture all those guys taking those oaths. And by the way, if you cheated in the ancient Olympic Games, they made a statue of you. So it was like they put you on Facebook, Instagram, and post, like it was a disaster for you publicly because and no one was going to forget. So you didn't want to do that. Okay. Number 3, the stripping room. The apodeuterion is a super important room in the ancient games. It was the room that the athletes would go. Of course, in the ancient games, they competed completely nude. And they would use all the olive oils and stuff that was around the Mediterranean climate in Olympia, and shave themselves with what they called a striggle, you know, like, so they would striggle their arms, their legs. Our swimmers do that today. I mean, like, they don't even want one hair to slow them down. Just like, it's off, 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 you know, even that one in the ear, you know. Down to like 1/100th of. We'll talk later. So these Olympic athletes did that too. They didn't want anything to tangle them up, even hair. They just were super manicured. It was a whole ritual. So the was the place they would do that. And of course, Roman baths and Greek baths were not uncommon in the ancient world because you didn't go home and like have hot water come right to your home. So you'd go to the public bath, and that's where you would disrobe, and that's where you'd clean up, and they would do that as well. The writer of Hebrews assumes you know that too, because the writer of Hebrews says when you're running the race in Hebrews 12:1 and 2, he says, remember, throw off, strip off, lay aside, rid yourself. It really means striggle. Striggle everything that hinders. Everything that encumbers, everything that slows you down or holds you back, and the sin which so easily entangles you. So he's saying, like, sin's really going to slow you down in the race. But it's not just sin. Any encumbrance, any weight. When I played baseball, we used to put a weighted donut on the bat, right? You know, just to, it's kind of heavy. But when you took it off, like, went so quick, you know. In basketball, we'd wear ankle weights when we'd work out. And then, of course, once you took those off, it's like, wow, I'm just like an antelope. When I was a swimmer, I've shared with you, we used to practice in sweats. Because just sweats, when they're wet, is like, oh my goodness, it just took everything to get your arm out of the water and to kick, and it's like, but then you take those off at the end of the workout, and it's like, I am like a guppy, like, shark. So, they train that way too, but when you went into the race, Paul, and in this case the writer of Hebrews, is saying, you definitely want to get rid of sin. That'll tangle you up for sure, but it could be any weight. It's not like a bad thing. Anything that slows you down. And for us, that could be lots of stuff. Anything that diverts your attention, saps your energy, dampens your enthusiasm, handicaps your journey with God, it's got to go. You have to struggle excess. It could be unmanageable schedules, unredeemed weekends, unfortunate debt, unhealthy relationships, unresolved conflicts. It could be unnecessary guilt. All these things are going to slow you down. They're just weights. Could be unprocessed emotional baggage, busy calendars, overextended commitments, a frantic lifestyle, inability to say no. I mean, we could go on. Sinful things like bad attitudes, love of money, preoccupation with things, obsession with self-importance, all those have to go for sure. Buried anger, sexual sin, covetousness, idolatry. It's got to go. The writer of Hebrews is probably talking about legal. They're very legalistic at the time, and rigid rule keepers and hubris and prideful and self-righteous. He's like, that's got to go. Like, that will kill your faith. So anything that gives you a cramp in the leg spiritually has got to go. Anything that breaks your stride has got to go. Anything that trips you up or makes you hobble in the race has got to go. And of course, in the ancient world, they wore the shatans, like a tunic, right? And you know, it's like running in a bathrobe. It's like, that's going to be terrible. That's got to go. So when the writer of Hebrews says, lay aside every encumbrance and sin that so easily entangles you, he's being honest. Like, strip down. Less is more. Get lean. Get mean. Olympic athletes do that. We're talking about your life, not like just a 30-second run. Your life has got to be leaner and meaner. You're not going to make it. And it's a marathon. Number 4, the stadium. The writer of Hebrews also says in this same passage, Hebrews 12, starting in verse 1, as believers, since we ourselves are surrounded or encompassed by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us trechomen, run with perseverance, the agona, Greek, where we get our English word agony, translated race. Let us run the agonizing race, the demanding, grueling marathon that is marked out for us. Here, the writer of Hebrews says, since we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, let's run with perseverance. So he actually pictures us in the stadium. The Tokyo Games are super interesting, right? Because no fans in this, no one watching. It's like, that is not the Christian life. That might be what it feels like. You might feel like you're just running and there's no one there. No. The writer of Hebrews says, you got to picture yourself at these Olympic... These games were sold out. I mean, trying to get into these games was crazy. But if you got in, you were like a fanatic. You were cuckoo. They were so into it. And you got to picture this stadium is filled great cloud, which was an ancient way of just saying this massive, undefined mass of humanity. And of course, we're in Hebrews 12, so who's he talking about? He's talking about the people that were in Hebrews 11 that he just talked about. We're surrounded by Abel and Enoch and Noah, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Joseph and Moses, Rahab, Gideon, Barak, Samson, David. I mean, the stadium's filled with other Christians in heaven that have already gone this race before you. They're watching you. They're watching me. They're watching us. And they're saying, keep going. Don't let 21st century politics get you down. We've gone through pharaohs. We've gone through Caesars. We can get through this season. Like, don't panic. We have fought the good fight, and the stadium is filled with all these people in heaven. This is one of the major passages that supports, do people in heaven actually see us or know what's going on with us? This passage says they absolutely do. And they're cheering. They're cheering on. You know, I picture when the Lord takes me, I could just picture seeing my kids or whoever remains and just going, come on, hang in there, you can do it. If you saw what we saw on the other side, it's so worth it. Don't give up. Hang in there. And the writer of Hebrews is saying, since we are surrounded by these martyrons, translated martyrs in the English, these great witnesses, keep persevering in the agon that's marked out for you, because they did it too. Daniel got through it. He was thrown in, lion's den, all kinds of crazy stuff, but you can do it. I know it's crushing. I know it's difficult. It's demanding. It's exhausting. It's taxing. It's torturous, but you're not alone. You're not in Tokyo where it's no one sees this. No, this stadium is filled with people who've gone before you, and they finished the race. Hi. Why did I get so emotional, David? What is wrong with me? It's okay. Okay, awesome. Number 5, the track. 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27 comes to mind. This is where Paul writes the church in Corinth and assumes, again, you can see the track. Track was a little different. It wasn't round like ours was. You would do laps like in a pool, if you this way. And it was sand, so it was like running on the beach. It was kind of a sandy dirt. Super cool, though. And yes, I did run it when my wife and I were in Olympia. I'm like, do you want to run it with me? She's like, no. No, I'll sit here in the shade. Go ahead. I'm getting down. She's like, my cuckoo husband. I'm running. But I could you could almost hear it. I could, at least. Until you can just hear people screaming and yelling. And anyways. Do you not know, Paul tells the Corinthians, that in a stadion, in a race, all the athletes, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize. Now that is another difference. Today we give first, second, and third. They only gave gold. Well, it wasn't even gold. It was a parsley leaf, olive leaves. But only one receives the prize. Run in such a way that you may win. And everyone who competes agonizes in the games, exercises self-control in all things. They go into enkratia. This is Greek for en means inside, kratia is strength. They go into strict training. They go into really building their inner strength. And they do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore, I run in such a way as not without aim, and I box in such a way as not just beating the air, but I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I preach to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Here, Paul really goes off and says, don't you know, look, when you run a race, only one gets the prize. So you need to run to win. We have to win. We have to. That's our goal. Now you got to remember the context. In 1 Corinthians 9, he had just talked about evangelism and changing the world. He says, to the Greeks I became like a Greek that I might win the Greeks. To the Jew I became like a Jew that I might win the Jews. To the weak I became weak that I might win the weak. So now when he's talking, he's not just saying for the glory of winning. No, he's actually saying we have to run the race to win souls. It's not a prize. And they do it for a perishable wreath, today you could get a gold medal, which is pretty cool. Paul and I were talking, you got one from the 1932 Olympics, right? So that's awesome. Not from you competing, because you were just way too young back then. But item, which is cool, so you got to bring that in so we could see it. But in the ancient games, they ran for a perishable wreath, Stephanos of pine or olive leaves or something. It's like a boutonniere, right? Like after 4 weeks, the thing shrivels and it's over. They do that for a perishable wreath. We're doing it for all eternity. We have to win. And that's totally different than the modern mentality. The creed of the modern Olympics is this. This is the real Olympic creed. The most important thing in the Olympic Games is not to win, but to take part. Just as the most important thing in life is not the triumph, but the struggle. And the essential thing is not to have conquered, but to have fought well. It's beautiful. So sweet. Great for a Hallmark card. In the ancient world, if you didn't win, you died. If Leonidas and his 300 hadn't stopped the Persians at the hot gates, Greece would be gone and all of Western civilization would fail. We're at a precipice right now that if freedom fighters don't get their act together and push against cancel culture and all the cuckoo-ness, we could lose our freedoms too. Freedom has to be, you have to win that. You have to fight for that. It's not just given. Go any country in the world. Does anyone want to move to another country? I don't think so. Yeah, the goal is not in the ancient games. The goal is to win. And Paul says to the Corinthians, our goal is to win. People's eternal lives are hanging in the balance. This is not something we want to take second. Oh, they didn't accept Christ. It's no big deal. The nice thing is we took part. No, we want to persuade people, to win them over. It's interesting if you study the leaders of God, like Moses or Joshua or King David or Gideon and Samson. They were all generals. They fought battles. I mean, there wasn't Mr. Rogers with a cute sweater, like just preaching in a church with pink carpet and flowers up front. There's nothing feminized about the faith back in the days. It was very real and real gritty. That's why Paul, when he wrote the Philippians, he says, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. It had nothing to do with at least we took part. It's no, we're winners. We have to win for our kids. We have to win for our marriages. We have to win over depression and discouragement and despair. We want to win the Lord's favor, and we want to win against the flesh and the crazy world system. We have to beat the devil. I mean, these are just very important for Christians. So here again, Paul uses Olympic metaphors because if you went back to the ancient world, those were the dudes that you're these are the dudes. You don't want to mess with these Green Berets. They didn't just win some event. They're going to go out and kick booty in the ancient world, and people aren't going to mess with their children. No one's going to be invading their homeland. And there's that sense Paul had with Timothy for us. Number 6 is the pole. Hebrews 12 kind of refers to the pole. That is, in the ancient games, I told you the stadium was kind of straight. And at the end of the stadium was a pole. And the runners used that pole as kind of a guide to figure out where the finish line was and how to stay on course. Because there's nothing worse than kind of meandering. They didn't actually have lanes in the ancient world. Today we've put the little lanes there, so if you go outside your lane you're disqualified. But in those days it was kind of a free-for-all. In so many, like boxing, there were no rounds. It's we're going to go till someone concedes, which means people got really hurt. Some people died in the Olympic Games. It's because it was just so unmanly to concede, it's they'd rather die. So the pole was there to kind of guide you and to fix your eyes. The writer of Hebrews uses a metaphor of Jesus being our pole. This is how he says it. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus. In other words, keep looking locked and focused on Jesus. Aphorao means to look away from everything else and like the cross. I'm just focused on the cross right now. Don't get distracted. Don't get sidetracked. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And it goes on to say in multiple times, consider him, consider him, consider him. Consider him who's endured such hostility. Consider him who's our prodromos, the forerunner. He's our forerunner. He's run this race already. Jesus has already done this race. So, and don't look around and look at the competition and start comparing yourself. Don't get distracted. Know your lane and know who you're focused on. Focus on Christ. He's the one who's gone before us. And of course, the writer of Hebrews is writing a bunch of people that were depleted. The church was having a lot of defections. There was a lot of apostasy. People were falling away from the faith. They were like, I thought I was in, but... and they took me off Facebook, and they're telling me if I don't get vaxxed, I'm out, so I'm just going to do it. People were just consenting and leaving the faith and not holding the line. And the writer's like, you got to get your focus right. I mean, quit watching CNN and MSNBC. You got to fix your eyes on Christ. What does he say to do? That's the most important thing. What does he say to do? Because you're drifting off course. You're turning away. You're falling from grace, the writer of Hebrews says. Quit looking around. You're getting distracted. Aphorao. Fix your eyes on him. Consider him. He's gone before you. When the wind's in your face, when your legs begin to wobble, when you're struggling to fight fatigue and frustration, when you need a boost of adrenaline, consider him. Focus on him. Do you know what Jesus went through? I mean, they spit on him, mocked him, scourged him, went the Via Dolorosa, they pierced him. I mean, it's like, okay, I know you're having a hard day. Could you consider Christ for a moment? He knows what a hard day's like. Focus on him, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm good. And let the Holy Spirit fill you so you can run. And ultimately, Hebrews says, so you don't grow weary and lose heart. It's easy to lose heart today. Super easy. It's like, what is happening? Don't keep fighting. Stay fixed. Okay. 2 more, real quick. Number 7 is the finish line. Everyone knows there's that finish line where that pole is. The writer of Luke records this for us in the book of Acts, chapter 20, verse 24. Referring to Paul, I consider my life worth nothing to me if only I may finish the race. I point this out, I know it's so obvious, but it's an Olympic metaphor. He could have said, I'm going to stay in it till I get to heaven. He could have said something super spiritual. I'm going to stay in it for the glory of God, to be redeemed with the saints. I'm going to stay in it. No, it's an athletic metaphor. I need to stay in it till I finish the race. And I complete the task the Lord has given me, the task of testifying to the gospel of God's grace. You don't win the prize unless you finish. We were watching a grueling race the other night, and about halfway through, it was so humid in Tokyo and so hot, I think like 3 or 4 of the runners had already dropped out. I'm like, that's okay. I mean, sweetheart, you were way behind, so that's super smart. Go get a Gatorade and call it a day. But that's a disaster if that's your life. In the Christian life, that's a disaster. It's not for a sporting event. That happens. We all have bad... I get it. No judgment. But you're going to have to find a way in the humidity and chaos of life to stay in that marathon to the very end. And Paul said, I consider my life worth nothing to me unless I finish. I've got to get to the end. You have to cross the line. He's talking like he's an Ironman or something. We've got to, as Hercules said, right, go the distance, right? That's the song. I have fought the good fight, he told Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:7-8. I have fought the good agona, the glorious contest, the grand fight. I have finished the dramon, the race, the course. I have kept the faith. And I don't mind reminding you, Paul didn't have an easy life. He was stoned, shipwrecked 3 times, beaten multiple times, received from the Jews 39 lashes. I could go on. I mean, but he says, now there's in store for us the crown of righteousness, the Stephanos, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who've longed for his appearing. So in his last chapter of his last book of the 13 letters he wrote in the New Testament, he tells Timothy, look, I fought the good fight. I've finished the race. And a crown, a Stephanos, an eternal crown, is waiting for me. But not just me. Everyone else who stays in the race. Everyone else who hangs in there to the end. Everyone else who's getting weary and frazzled, and I know you want to throw in the towel, I get it. But who's fixing their eyes on Christ and hanging in there. There is a prize. There's a prize. And then finally, for today at least, I could go on, but we'll end with the Bema seat. The Bema seat is basically the awards platform in the ancient world. Philippians 15. Paul tells the Philippians, I did not run or labor for nothing. I didn't run in vain. God's going to reward. God sees when you're going through tough times and you're like, does anyone even notice? Does anyone care? He sees. And by the way, all the saints who've gone before us, they see too. And they're cheering us on. I don't know if that pumps you up, but that gets me kind of emotional and pumped up. I'm like, I just have to do it for these folks. I mean, we just can't let them down. It's a relay race, right? They did theirs and they handed the baton, and now we have it. It's like, we got to finish this. Got to hand it on. By the way, if you won the ancient games, they would have all kinds of pageantry for you. Triumphal processions, a parade, sacrifices to thank the gods, banquets, plaques on their city gates. They were exempt from military, from taxes, special songs and poems. They were given honored seats at the Lakers and Dodger games locally. You know, they had statues made for them. There's all kinds of stuff. But Jesus says, and recorded for us in the last chapter of the entire New Testament, Revelation 22, my reward is with me. Behold, I'm coming soon. Hang in there. My reward's with me. And I will give it to everyone according to what he's done. That's how the New Testament ends. Like, when you're getting punched, when in one of those boxing matches, or Ephesians, right? When Paul writes the Ephesians, we wrestle. There's another Olympic metaphor. We wrestle, not against flesh and blood, right? Those wrestling matches weren't like, okay, ding ding, time's over. You had a minute. Go ahead to your sides. Go get a sip of water and talk to your coach. No, these were wrestling matches until someone's eyes were poked out and someone says, I'm done. I'm dead. But Jesus says, hang in there, because I'm coming back and I've got a reward. You're going to get rewarded. It's pretty cool. I guess I should conclude. Such a shame. I just feel like crying. I could go on. Tonight, if you're watching on NBC, I think starting at 5 o'clock here Pacific time, you'll get to see the closing ceremonies of the Olympics, and of course the torch will go out until typically 4 years, but I guess it'll be 3. The 32nd Modern Olympic Games will come to a close, and of course we'll have a chance to find out who's going to be on the next Wheaties box, and who were the heroes, and who won, who lost, what were the controversies. There's all going to be all kinds of stories, and some of those stories will last for years and years and years, right? You still see Mary Lou Retton on like, sweetheart, you did a vault in 1984, okay? Right? But she's still on stuff. Peggy Fleming. It's like, Peggy, I think I was 6 when I was watching you, and you're on some commercial for something, right? But those memories, they live on and on. By the way, in the 1984 Olympic Games, I got to go to the closing ceremonies with my dad. How cool is that? Do we have time for stories? You want to hear it? No, we don't. But I was like a small child, you know. Just all those countries coming together in the LA Coliseum, the games were over, and there's just celebration. And I had American flags. My dad's like, "Why do you have two of them?" I'm like, "I brought one for you." It's like, he's like, "I'm not going to hold a flag." I'm like, "Dad, what are you going to do? You're going to have so much energy. You're going to have to wave it." And it was so fun. Anyways, the games are closing in Tokyo, but the Christian games, so to speak, the Olympic faith that we need is not closing. We're in it. We're in it. So what did we learn today? What I hope you learned is that in the ancient world, they could picture the Olympic Games like you and I could picture Disneyland. And so they just use these metaphors going, of course, you know what I'm talking about. They think you know what the gym is like. If you can picture the gym and the athletes working hard, work hard for godliness. Physical discipline is terrific, but it only lasts for now. Be godly. Work hard. Read the Word. Discipline yourself. And remember the temple. That's where they took the oath. You have to compete according to the rules. You can't make your own stuff up. You've got to do it the way Jesus outlined it for us. So we do meet on the first day of the week. I remember when churches were moving to Saturday night services and midweek services. And look, there's freedom and there's grace in Christ. You can do that. But I remember people were asking me what I thought. I'm like, I just hesitate, to be honest with you, changing a tradition that's gone on for 21 centuries because we want to make it more convenient for people when we were asked to align ourselves with the resurrection, which happened on Sunday morning. Well, some people work Sunday morning, yeah, but some work Wednesday night and some work Saturday night. Like, why don't we try to find a way to order ourselves around the ancient traditions? There's grace, of course, if you want to do it differently, but, you know. Let's compete according to the rules as best we can. And the stripping room. All of you have stuff today. I know you can go home and go, I gotta straggle this. It's too much. Look, just open your calendar, right? The Cash family. It's like, how are we gonna look? There's 7 things in the same hour. Let's try to say no. Let's say no to. Maybe we don't do that today, right? It's not like it's sinful. It's not bad stuff. It's just too much. And we're going to be frazzled. And then when we're frazzled, we get angry. And then we're short with people. And less is more. Run and lay aside encumbrance and sin. The stadium, run your race. The track, run to win. The pole, run with aim. The finishing line, finish strong. And the bema seat, remember, we will get rewarded. Amen? Amen. We did it. Okay.